Hey traders, welcome to another US equity game. Starting with the S&P, you can see how extended. I'm just going to run through all the time frames on the S&P. Pretty much all of the indices are exactly the same in terms of where they're sitting in the structure. But I'm just going to run through the S&P so you can see from the weekly all the way down to the hourly where we're sitting exactly and what to expect moving forward. So on the weekly structure, you can see we are very much in overextended territory already. Last correction was obviously in the 2020 region with COVID, and we've rallied really strongly since then. If you can just look at the comparison of the impulses, you can just see how steep this impulse is and how overextended it is already. So very, very cautious in terms of getting along with any real conviction. Then we go into the daily structure. We have same thing, nice little impulse correction. And this one has a little bit of legs to go to the upside. So although the week is overextended, the daily is very much in the region where it could start to look for a pullback, but at the same time, a little bit more upside, full target 427,850 on the S&P. Then back into the lower time frames, we can see what we have is still a fair amount of downside to come if we look at this as a triangle correction. That's what we're looking at here, but the scenario right now is to look at a running triangle, which means again upside, looking at around about this 4273, potentially as high as 3500. So higher time frames overextended, lower time frames still a little bit of room to run, and we need to be cautious about. When you look at this hourly structure, though, you can just see how we've come without a decent correct move at all. So all the way from 38.46 up to 41.65 without an hourly correction. That's a long way to go, even for an overcooked market. So I'm quite interested in looking for a little bit of a short-term short, low risk, a little bit low risk, like a 1% position. But as you can see, we're starting to form a little bit of a head and shoulders type structure here, which is quite interesting to see. And this is potentially what members, as an overextended flag position. So I think trading this to the downside, entry order of these lows, and just a nice wide stop will really be useful in getting into the trade, with the possibility of, at the very least, getting out at break even, but a good chance of getting a pretty good return on that trade. So that's where we're sitting on most of these markets. NASDAQ pretty extended as well, but on the lower time frames, a little bit of room to run. But again, hourly it's quite overextended, so we need a little bit of a corrective structure. Just because we overextended or just because we're not extended on the lower time frames doesn't mean we can't here either. So that just adds to the possibility of a really good trade if the S&P decides, oh, I've done enough, move further enough, far enough, we're going to go into a really decent higher time frame correction, and you can really pick the top here with a fairly low risk position. So this is why I like this trade a lot. Dow Jones Industrial, also quite overcooked, but still got some room for the upside. I think the S&P is overextended and the one with the most potential upside. Russell, as you can see, the higher shares are not getting much love, and we're watching this closely for a potential higher time frame top. Does have a little bit of a double head and shoulders information at the moment. Watching for this to develop into a corrective structure for further downside moving forward. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on the Russell, because that could be an indicator as to what the other stocks could be doing moving forward, the other indices rather. Facebook, I still see downside on Facebook. The structure itself is a little bit weird, a little bit strange. Potentially have to look at all of this as a complete correction, and this is just a fine leg up and maybe getting a full leg down. At the very least, despite the complexity of the structure, you may just be getting moved from 315 down to around about 250, which is also quite a nice little move, 20% shaving off from the highs. So Facebook looking good for downside, which is obviously a concern for the rest of the indices. Same with Apple. Apple not as clear as Facebook, but you'll see now Amazon has that same kind of look to it. We start to see some downside in Apple here, especially in today's session. You may just be seeing Apple move down towards these lows at a 102 and maybe even beyond that, given where we're sitting on the higher time frame structures. So bearish tech at the moment. Amazon, I'm very bearish Amazon when you look at the structure. Again, looking for a move from around this 3,400 region down to the very least these lows at 287. Target is around about 25.50. So another pretty big the downside potentially. If we start to see some downside, I think you'd want to get to that short. And again, a little bit of a head and shoulders type structure right at the end of a very, very extended higher time structure. Just a reminder where we're sitting on the monthly time frame. Just have to be cautious with that. Microsoft still kind of waiting to see what this is doing, but again, not hard to see how extended it is. At the same time, lower time frame could go even further into extension, but just zoomed out, you can see we're really approaching bubble territory now. If you want to get long with any conviction, I think call options are the way to play it, and you're playing on a lower time frame scenario with a target of around about 323 full target. So pretty good upside if it does take off, but just keep in mind it is high risk because of how extended we are. That's why I like the call option with limited amounts of capital at risk. Netflix still kind of looks like it wants to turn. The whole structure itself is an absolute mess. I'm not so keen on this one. It's kind of sitting on the sidelines here. Google, same as Microsoft, just really overcooked. Even worse in terms of the structure itself. Really give you much, but you can just see how overextended it is. If you want to be long Google, I really suggest using call options to do so rather than being really invested in. It might have a liquidity issue trying to get out of it if we do turn from here. AMD continues to march down. Our structure is looking good. We were looking for this correction to play out pretty much since the beginning of March, and so far so good. Not the structure so much, so potentially this develops into something like it kind of has a triangle look to it already. It's got the right crossovers, A, B, C, D, E, which could be playing out straight to the downside if that is the case. If you want to trade this as a triangle, you look for a break of that, shorter below these lows, and stop above those highs. So pretty good risk reward. The correction, I'm not quite sure we've done enough, so it's a little bit iffy if you ask me. So I think there's going to be a little bit more coming out of this. We might be here for a little while longer. But again, I'm not bullish in any sense. I actually think it's a bearish move once the correction resolves itself. Boeing, we want Boeing to kind of form a little bit of corrective structure, and so far so good. We've had a little bit of an impulse off the highs, first move, a little bit of a correction, and we're looking for further downside from there. So technically speaking, pretty bearish Boeing. We just need to be patient with it. As you guys know, has been the name of the game so far. Alibaba, really good for short. The structure itself has been really good. We've broken highs at the 241. Now we're starting to break lower. Given us a little bit of a nice little flag there as well. And this is very keen on to take to the downside. This is probably the top of my watch list at the moment. The structure itself is really good. The downside target is really good. Everything looks really good on all time frames to get into this Alibaba short. And it ties into my generally thought short thesis in equities at the moment. A very clear picture for me. Bank of America, again, like I said, we wait to look for the short. I'm not interested in any longs, especially in finance stocks. I'm really just keen for the short, but I'm not trying to pick a top. I'm waiting for confirmation of a top. We've had quite a nice move off these highs, but I need to see a little bit more of a corrective structure to get convinced that this is the top and we can start to look at a move to the downside. A little bit of a concern is a corrective structure for upside. But again, I'm not interested in the long. You look at the higher time frames, again, it's overextended on all levels. And when you zoom out all the way, you can see the potential downside that we have moving forward is a little bit of a scary one. So just be very cautious with finances here. The downside is going to be very, very bad. It's just a matter of time in my point, from my point of view. Same with Berkshire Hathaway, looking at the extension, we have a nice little impulse, very clean corrective structure, and we're sitting in overextended territory. So Berkshire's another one. I'm more keen to find the short than the long. Even the hourly looks pretty overextended. But again, these things can run quite a lot further than you want them to. So if you're looking to add some risk onto your table, you can go into some options. But then again, I would rather look at some of these other pairs on the cards to look for those long. Something like MasterCard or Visa is a much cleaner setup to get long and to get long exposure against our generally short thesis. So just keep an mind open for that. Beyond meat, I still like our short trade. I still think this is going to play out a little bit longer. Ideally, I want to see a nice move to break these lows at one. All of that would be a very, very nice expanding or contracting triangle following a very, very nice impulse with a very, very nice higher time frame structure, which members will know about, and where our downside target really is. So this is something I'm very, very keen on. Just need to give it some time to play out. Again, another clean short in the markets. Citigroup, again, we were looking for this to develop into a corrective structure, thinking that this is the first correction of the lows. So far, so good. Only issue is it's looking like a little bit of a correction to make a new high and then another pullback there. And that's actually one big correction for further upside. In that case, I might look to get long this just because of the corrective structure and the potential bullishness that the market has at the moment. Kind of blow off top is a possibility, and this could be some nice exposure to something that will hedge my short thesis. So we're watching this pretty closely unless this starts to develop into a move that resembles downside, in which case I'm watching this even more closely because I'm more interested in the short. But again, I said we're going to have strong held, and if we get a step for the long, I'm happy to get into long on some call options just to expose myself to some upside moving forward. Camco is another one. Nice impulse off the highs, going into what looks like a corrective structure for downside. Kind of ties into my generally short thesis commodities as well, basically all based on a strong dollar. And this starts to play out really nicely, but as you can see, it's going to take a little while to play out. So we'll be keeping half an eye on that. Chipotle made new highs. Now we have to see really what's going to happen from here. If this starts to resemble a move to the downside, I'm very keen for this short as well, because we have a nice move off the highs from a complete higher time frame target. Maybe it's not as complete as I would like. Let's just take a look. Impulse, yeah, okay. There's actually more upside to come potentially on Chipotle. This could be one of those that blows off the top. But given how far we come, you want to see a little bit of a corrective structure. So I'd much rather wait, get something corrective happening in here that resembles some moves to the upside, and then we can start to look for those longs and add that to our long quiver, that we can get exposure to that long side. But again, this is going to take some time to play out, so just going to be patient with that. DraftKings looking really good. We were looking for this to develop into a nice running flat structure, and so far so good. It's looking really, really good right now. I want to see a little bit of a pop up towards the 62.50, 64 region, and then I'm keen for that short to the downside, because this is a higher time frame structure plus lower time frame structure that looks really, really good to me. Members know we've been watching this for a while, and we'll be very keen to get into the short when the time comes. Disney is another one that looks really bearish. Why I really like this is the size of the impulse off the highs. It's a very high conviction impulse off the high to say we've topped out and we're on our way down. Even if you go to a classic charting point of view, you can see how this is a nice little head and shoulders with a really, really big head, and has some really good potential downside. When we zoom all the way out, you guys know the structure I've been looking at for some time. Depending how you look at this, they all look for really, really big moves. And I reckon $100 is not far off the cards of irrational. So very, very keen to find this short, and very, very keen to watch this develop. Potentially a triangle forming here when you look at the contracting nature of this and the size of the impulse. So we'll have to watch this fairly closely. At the very least, if you break these lows, I want to be in this to the downside. EA Sports, another one that's been kind of tricky to trade. All we know is that we are keen to get into a short trade at some point because of the higher time frame structure. But this whole little pattern that we've had here is really throwing things for a loop. Potentially have to start looking at this as a bit of an overextended kind of running flat. Maybe that was the blow off top, and now we're seeing a high, which I'm kind of inclined to look at when you look at the interior structure of this. I just don't like this as an A wave. It's an absolute mess. But given the 1, 2, 3 nature of it, it is very possible. So how do we trade this moving forward? Well, if that is the case, we want to see this as our first impulse, and we want to see this as a first little corrective structure forming. And if this starts to form a correction, we'll look for the short. Longs, I'm not interested in the long, given the structure we're seeing. I think a limited upside, high risk. So I'm more inclined to just be patiently waiting for the short trade to develop itself. And that's generally the market I'm looking at the moment. Patience is key, and it's been key for the last month. It's been a little bit frustrating for our traders, but there's much more opportunities down the line. And what we're seeing now is very high risk trading if you are looking to get in without conviction of the price structure, giving you that confidence for the short trade. Something like Expedia, which I'm very keen on. I just want to see this move down to break these lows and give us another quick pop higher. This is a very nice little B wave, but it's taking a little bit longer than I would like. But it looks really good for a corrective wave following two very impulsive waves. So once this completes itself, you're going to be looking for a trade from around about 173 to close a gap at about 100. And again, that's showing you what I'm seeing in the general market, like a 70% pullback in Expedia. You can see what the general market is going to be looking like. Ford is another one looking really good, and this looks like it's one of the first movers. It's on its way down already. Nice little flag developing, following a topping structure. Only issue is potentially all of this is your first impulse, which means all of this is just a first corrective move, which means we're going to potentially drop down to 11, pop higher on 13, and then drop from there, which gives you a nice little kind of topping pattern structure to it. But I don't think there's anything wrong with getting in following this little, I'm going to call it a flag. It's not a flag, but I'm going to call it a flag, just because more than likely you're going to break through here. The very least, you can get break even if you want to play it like that, or you can have a wider stop and just watch this develop. You may need to take some losses or paper losses before this moves to the down. When we zoom out the high time frame, just like a lot of these other charts, we're seeing something that has potential to really get some legs to the downside. And obviously, there's a lot of potential returns in that you can tolerate a little bit of a risk. I'm not going to get into too much, kind of just still chopping around, waiting to see what comes out of this. GDX, I'm really, really bearish. You guys know, my members know, what we've seen here is a great amalgamation of classic charting with structure chart trading, or price structure trading as we call it. Left shoulder, head, right shoulder in line with a perfect ABC flat, which happens to be a neckline break and retest. So watch for gold to turn. I'm watching the dollar very closely. This really looks like it wants to turn to the upside, which obviously be very bearish for gold. And when you look at the structure here, we very, very much in line with touching at that 1-to-1 region at 36.58. That's a complete ABC correction with beautiful structure within it, and we can really start to look for downside. So watch this closely to start to move to the downside, in which case you want to be in, and in which case our downside target is breaking these lows at 12.20, if I'm not mistaken. So very, very keen on this short. That's a big, big fall. And obviously a lot of people in the gold trade will be on the wrong side if it starts to run. Goldman Sachs still giving us our classic charting pattern and some pretty good structure when you look at this little ABC correction. But I'm not going to get into this too much unless we break this little trend line here and break this pattern. And then I'll be quite keen on this. But right now, I'm just watching it develop. I think entry order below these lows at 322 is a good way to play it. Higher time frame. You guys know, or my members know, just how bearish I am. Goldman, we're talking about 2008, 2009 type levels for the move lower. I'm not going to get into that now. Biotech is another one that's really lining itself up beautifully. Very, very clean corrective structure following an impulse, higher time frame, very, very clean. Now we're just waiting for a completion of this correction, and we can start to look for entry to the downside. IBM, not flirting with those highs that we wanted to break. I'm hoping some good news comes out. Earnings today, you might see pop higher. Is it today, 19th? Yes, earnings today could be very, very positive. We might see this go break the 160s. I'm not so interested in the long just because of the uncertainty of the structure. I'm very interested in short because of the certainty of the structure, especially if we can see a push up to 160. So I'll be watching that very closely today. Earnings could be very positive. We might see a strong break up to the upside, and that's where I'm going to be very interested in getting into the short. Intel Corp, for this to play out, not going to get into too much detail there. Johnson broken down nicely, still around our entry order, but structure still looks good for downside. Some pretty negative news coming out about Johnson & Johnson lately, so that should start to affect stock to the downside, and we could start to see a strong move to the downside to match our entry at this region. Jpmorgan Chase still got, again, another head and shoulders type structure, top, a little bit of a corrective structure zigzag, and some downside momentum. So I think an entry order below these lows, very, very good. Again, financials on very, very financials. So all just into the right level where you can really find some downside target. Again, 2008, 2009 type moves. This isn't just a short-term trade. It's something very, very big. Live Nation, another one that's playing out really nice. A little trade flag on the hourly chart that's played out really nicely, and we should see continued downside here. Triple just continues to march higher, very, very frustrating in terms of the structure. We were looking for a short to develop out of this little structure here, developed into more of a triangle, and then started to run on us. And now we're sitting overextended on the lower time frame. So I'm not really interested in anything that's happening here. If you want to get into some riskiness that we're seeing busy forming, which has some interesting ramifications to the downside if it does play out. So that may be worth trading, but again, I'm on rising wedges without higher time confirmation, which we don't really have here, to be honest. Morgan Stanley, another one, pretty bearish, but a little bit early. You can trade this as a little bit of a wedge if you want to be higher risk. Oh, sorry, not a wedge, a flag. But I want to be patient with this and just be very specific that I've picked the top. So I'm waiting for this to be the first impulse, for this to be a complete corrective structure that gives me an indication that we are going to be heading lower following a correction in this region. Again, higher time frames, very, very bearish, as members know. MicroStrategy, getting some legs to the downside. We've been bearish MicroStrategy for some time, and since this latest high, you can see that we're down 22%. This should continue, given that we've had a very nice impulse and quite a clean corrective structure to the downside. And again, a little bit of a topping pattern, head and shoulders type structure that's formed. So downside, again, pretty strong. Nvidia, we popped higher. We're looking for potential entry here, but we just continue to march higher. I said some call options might be in your favor that have paid out well. Potentially still a decent amount of upside to go, but I would like to see something at least a little bit corrective on the lower time frames. High time frame target is actually really nice at 880. But again, I want to see some lower time frame corrective moves to give us a little bit of conviction that we are heading higher. It doesn't even have to be a big one, just something that lasts maybe 2, 3, 4 days, maybe this week, and then we can look for another long entry. But right now, I think it's run, and we can't really chase it. One of our good trades that we've taken recently. We were looking for this ABC running flat in this region. There was a beautiful little flag here that you could have taken, and the upside has been phenomenal so far. Upside target still good to go. We still have a big run to go, at least 43, more than likely 48. So this should continue. If you're not in already, don't chase it. Give it some time. Wait for a little bit of a corrective move, and then look for those longs. This is one of the ones I like, is a long, again, against our hedge against our short bias that we have at the moment. Riot breaking down, pre-market even lower. We were looking for this to break lower and should continue to break lower. Nice structure as well. I think single digits on Riot is on the cards. Ross Stores continues to chop around. bit of a rising wedge still. Again, we don't trade rising wedges too much because of their fallibility, if you want to put it that way, or unreliability. So I'm just waiting patiently. I know near a high, I believe near a high, and we're going to see a turn. But structurally, there's still potentially some upside here. If you look at A, B, C, D, E, upside target's probably 155 if we go to full, which is probably more like 140 is the full target. So still some upside, very limited. It's not one of my ones I would like to be long, so I'm kind of ignoring. I'm still keen on the short though. Spirit, we had a little bit of suspicion that this was forming a little bit of ACD running flat, and we said entry above the high is one way to play that if you are looking to some risk. That being said, I think we still have that on the cards, and I think an entry above these highs is still good. Our target is pretty good, which members will know about, and we do look really good for some upside here. This is one of the ones I do like as a long, potential long. Lots of demand for travel, especially within the US, which could benefit the stock, and we could run, especially on these lower time frames. Higher time frames, I'm not so keen on. I think we are a little bit overextended, but we have earnings pretty soon that may come out as a little bit of an upside shock, and you could see this pop higher. So watch earnings this week on the 22nd to push this one higher. Starbucks, very overextended on the lower time frames, pretty overextended on the higher time frames, still expecting a move to the downside to come. So I'm not looking for longs. I'm more inclined to just patiently wait for the short, which, as you can see, is the strategy that we have for a lot of these stocks. In a second. It's really, really frustrating. Okay. Seagate, look for the short, again, higher time frame, very, very keen on the short, lower time frame, very, very keen on the short. Hourlies, very, very overextended. When you look at this hourly chart, you can see how far we've come. We're touching on a 0.618. This could be a region of turning. We might see a turn here, and it might be worth taking an overextended flag play. Members, keep an eye on overextension flag here on hourly. It could be a very, very good entry for you on the lower time frames and higher time frames. You guys know what we're looking for there. So that could be a very, very good trade. Keep a very close eye on that. AT&T finally starting to get some downside after a very strange structure. You can see good downside momentum. Looking for a little bit of a correction here and a very nice short in this region. So keep an eye on that. Visa, we are very close to these highs and pretty much along the lines of starting to look for a long entry. We still think an entry above size will pay off for you. I think your upside target on Visa is really good. If it is going to play off, it is going to play out. This is what I do like as a long hedge, and this should go and reach a full target at 280 given the structure that we're seeing. So keep an eye on that. ExxonMobil, we are ready to go. Members, you know exactly what you're looking at here. So just start to look for some downside short-term, some short trade entries. Oil still looking good for me for downside. ExxonMobil should follow. Structure is amazing. Nice break out of a rising wedge. Very clean impulse, very clean corrective structure. Short downside target is you got at the lows of 320s. So do your thing, make it happen. That's a really, really good trade. Zoom still looking good. I was looking at this as a triangle, starting to see this as a little bit of a running flat, and we've been given a bit of a gift in terms of a flag pattern there. So trading this to the downside, I think, is very, very good trade. Structure looks really good. Length of correction works for me. And yeah, looking really good for downside. Again, short bias. I really like these shorts lining up, and Zoom is definitely high up on that list. Martin's another one on that list. Overextended flag play, again, very, very good looking trade here in terms of overextended flag play for members. So keep an eye on that. That's going to be high up on our list. MasterCard, same as Visa, pick your poison, take both. both look good for us and a nice hedge. PayPal, flirting with a 1414. Obviously not the most ideal structure, but started to get some downside momentum here. And if we do go to the downside, PayPal is just basically out a nice head and shoulders structure that we can look at. Something along those lines, and you should get some very, very nice downside from that. Same as Tesla. It's a little pop that we had last week in Tesla, where all the Tesla bulls were roaring. They were off to the races. It was a dip. I think this is a big, big trap, and we're going to see some big downside here. It looks really good. Very strong reaction from that 1-to-1 region. I think this is a very, very good trade. This is a little bit of a flag to the downside. You'll get a very, very good downside momentum if it does take off. And again, very much in line with our short thesis. So Tesla high up on the list. It's cool, guys. As you can see, I'm maintaining my short bearish point. Although we do have quite a few hedges on the long side, doesn't mean you can be very technical in your trading and take advantage of either or conditions. So look for those short entries. Members, you know what to look for. We do have some very, very clean entries. Look at those overextended flag plays. Those are my favorite, and those should and will pay off really nicely for you. So keep a close eye on those that I mentioned. We can chat about them more in the members area. Those that aren't members, thanks for joining. I hope to see you in that members area. We have a lot going on in there, and you'll learn a lot. Members' feedback has been amazing so far. I'm really looking to grow this community. If you have any questions, get hold of me. We can chat on Skype live, in person, just so I can ease your tension, ease your mind on what the course entails and what you will get from it. I'm happy to chat. I'm happy to give you my time. It's cool, guys. Have a great week, and we will chat again next week. Members, I will chat to you in the group.